Good morning all, and Happy New Year, and welcome to Good Moves. And I'm Ian, I'm your host. So, in my previous video, the first on this channel, I showed you a couple of examples of the potential disaster that can happen on your f2 square if you're playing as white, or on the e1 h4 diagonal. And if you're playing as black, your f7 square. These are also sometimes referred to as your kings, bishops, pawns. And just to remind you, these are the most vulnerable points in your position at the start of any game. So what I'd like to do today is to show you some further examples of this. And to do that, let me begin by bringing up my board. So there we are. And again, I'm just going to enlarge myself by a fraction. Should do. So, firstly, let's look at a position which was examined by the Portuguese player in a book, a Portuguese player by the name of Damiano. And in a book that he wrote in 1512, he examined the following moves. So after e4, e5, and knight to f3, what black's e pawn comes under attack. And now there are a few ways in which you can defend this pawn, and some ways are better than others. So interestingly, another player, a French master, a great French master by the name of Philidor, Francois-André Dominican Philidor, in full, if memory serves. He famously said that the best way to defend a pawn is with another pawn. And so, for example, black could defend his e5 pawn simply by playing this pawn on d7 up to d6. And now basically, Philidor's thinking essentially was that basically, the pawn's strength is its weakness. So remember, the pawn is the weakest of all the chess pieces. And so here, for instance, white is hardly likely to recapture the e5 pawn because you're simply going to lose your knight, and the knight is worth, roughly speaking, about 3 pawns. So this would be a good trade for black, but not such a good trade for whites. So, and interestingly enough, this move, d6, actually is known as Philidor's defense. Another way you can defend that pawn, maybe the best move, is to play your knight to c6, and that pawn is now nicely defended, and you've also brought one of your minor pieces in the game. And without digressing too much, just to clarify some terminology, when we say minor pieces, we're referring to your knights and your bishops, and if we say major pieces, we're referring to your rooks and your queen. So just to make that distinction. Now, sometimes you'll see black defend this pawn with the move f6. And, well, although this doesn't necessarily lose on the spot, this is not really a good way of defending the pawn. And white can take a chance here by playing now knight takes e5, and well, you may think, well, so what's the difference? Because isn't white just losing the knight again? Well, yes, but the difference is that black here has left his king very exposed on this h5 e8 diagonal. This is one of the reasons we recommend that you don't, as a rule of thumb, that you generally try to avoid moving the pawns, near your king. Your e pawn is an exception. So usually we mean the h, the g, and the f pawns, particularly at the beginning of the game, and also if you castle kingside. And don't worry if castling kingside doesn't mean much to you just now. But so here, white can exploit this weakness that black has created by calling this check on h5. And this leaves black in a quandary, because if black plays this pawn up to g6, attacking the queen, and yes, admittedly, it does get black out of check, but unfortunately, it will lose that rook in the corner on h8 after queen takes e5 check. And now after a move, for example, I don't know, let's say queen takes queen e7, you can just bag this rook in the corner, and black is left without a decent reply. So let's go back. Let's assume instead that black plays the king up to e7, which is the only other legal move. Well, this really doesn't help much, because after queen takes e5 check, the king is forced now to move to f7. We can give another check with our bishop here on c4. And let's say, well, actually, I am following Damiano's analysis here. So after d5, and let's say bishop takes d5 check, king g6. The idea behind that pawn move really was so that black can at least get some, well, given that he's a knight up, he can afford at least to give white a pawn back. But now after king g6, you can see that the black king, has been forced out into the open, and it's not long for the world, to be sure. A king basically exposed like this on a crowded board full of pieces, it's just asking for trouble. So white continues here with h4, and see, basically we just want to push that pawn up check, and little by little we're depriving the black king of more squares. And well, if now black tries to stop that with a move like h5, so that this prevents white from pushing the pawn to h5 himself and calling check, white can simply just snatch this pawn on b7, and basically white will be regaining material, and at the same time, enjoys a distinct advantage here. And the point is, yes, it's true that this bishop can be taken, but the problem is if that happens, then the bishop that was on c8 is no longer controlling this f5 square, and we can simply call check here. And now after king h6, which is the only legal move, we play our pawn up to d4, and this is what we call a discovered check, because even though it's the bishop that actually gives the check, the bishop doesn't move, so it becomes it's discovered. And well, the only, again, basically you can see that this is just completely hopeless for black. Basically, at the very least, we will win black's queen after bishop takes g5 check, and here we have a fork. The king's in check, and the bishop attacks black's queen on d8. So that's effectively game over. So what I'm going to do now is reset the board. and show you a slightly more complex example of the inherent dangers at the beginning of a game, particularly around this vulnerable points in your position. It's potentially that bit more dangerous if you're playing with black. It's important to bear this in mind because remember, as black, if you're playing with black, you're playing a move behind. So it's a little bit like shadow boxing. So again, we're going to kick off with e4, d5, and now knight f3 again. And now let's say here that black does play knight c6, perfectly sound move. And so white continues with another developing move, bishop to c4. And black can now play knight f6. This is known as the two knights defense, which kind of speaks for itself. And so here, and I'm actually following a game analysed by an Italian player by the name of Palerio. And this was in the same century, in the 16th century, but in the last quarter of the 16th century. So not too long after the position we looked at previously, looked at by Damiano. So here white can play knight to g5, and this now becomes the famous fried liver attack. And I can't at this moment in time tell you why it bears that name. Seems a strange name for a chess opening, and particularly given that most chess openings are usually named after a certain master who originated it. And in many other cases, after some certain historical games that were played in significant tournaments. So there's the the Vienna variation of a sort of I think it's known as the Vienna variation of an opening, possibly. I think the Queen's Gambit. There's also in that same opening what's known as the Carlsbad structure, which basically refers to a certain kind of pawn structure employed by black in that same opening that became very famous after a tournament played in Carlsbad, I think sometime in the 20th or 19th century. My memory's a little hazy though. Anyway, basically here we have this coordinated attack on black's f7 pawn. So it's attacked by two white pieces and only defended once by the black king. And it's not possible for, well, I say it's not possible. The only way piece you could use to defend the f7 pawn here is with a queen e7, but this is a really bad move that doesn't, I mean, white just simply take that pawn with check here. And of course, you're not going to give up, or it's hardly likely that you're going to give up your queen for two minor pieces in this position. It's not really justified. So going back, black's really only try here to put up a fight and stay in the game is to sacrifice this pawn on with d5, and of course this now prevents white from taking the pawn on f7. And here white usually continues with this pawn capture, and now note that the knight on c6 comes under attack here. And now even back in the late 16th century, Palerio found the right move for black here, which is to play knight to a5. Basically, this attacks the bishop on c4, which usually retreats to e2. And there are a lot of games in the if you have access to any database, you can find a number of games basically which feature this very variation. But let's see what happens if black instead takes this pawn on d5, because black is not forced here to move the knight to a5. That's not a forced move. So, and you may rightly ask, well, you know, what's wrong with simply just taking the pawn on d5? Because after all, you know, doesn't black regain his pawn? He has a knight, you know, securely, at least for the moment, posted in the centre of the board. The knight's protected by the black queen. Well, it turns out that white has a very promising sacrifice here on f7 with knight takes f7. And now notice there's a fork here. This knight is forking the black queen and the black rook on h8. And black doesn't have anything better here than to take the knight and accept the sacrifice. So white now has to prove that he, or indeed she, has compensation for this sacrifice piece. And this is borne out with the following sequence. So we have queen to f3 check, and at the same time, we now have a double attack on this knight on d5. Both the bishop and the queen are attacking that knight. So white's basically threatening to regain the piece. Black's only attempt here to hold the extra piece is to play king e6. And white now continues knight c3, bringing up a third piece to attack this knight. And unfortunately, black cannot move that knight on d5 or trade knights here because of the pin. So notice you can't move this knight without leaving your king in check, which is illegal. The only way, again, to hold the extra piece is to retreat this knight on c6 to e7. So notice now that knight protects the other knight on d5. So now, of course, white is still a piece down, and but white has a significant lead in development here. And the best way to try to exploit this is to open as many lines as possible. When we say open lines, what we mean is we basically want to mobilize our forces as fast as we can, and at the same time open files, diagonals, ranks, etc., so that we can really maximize the mobility and coordination of our pieces. So here, basically, white just plays this move, d4, just basically blasting open. That means that this bishop can come in the game. And basically, even though this pawn can be taken, this is really not to be recommended. Queen e4 check just basically leaves black in a very difficult position. And also, when the king moves, I mean, king d6 here, I mean, is, you know, just terror. It doesn't do anything. We're just regaining the piece, quite simply. So black does better here to play a move like c6. Again, basically bolstering this knight in the centre of the board and just trying to hold his position. Now, I should say all of the moves played by black in this example we're looking at, because it's I should also note that not all of the moves played by black in this particular example are forced, and they're actually played, I basically by black in an attempt to hold the extra material. This will make more sense as we proceed. So now I'm going to play bishop g5. So now this white gets his last minor piece in the game and is ready to castle queenside or kingside. And I'll say a little bit about that without digressing too much. But so here, basically, again, white is trying to exploit the pin on this knight on d5. So basically, just wants to eliminate this knight on e7, which is one of the defenses of this knight. And this is really basically designed to, white is essentially trying to strip black of his or her defences. So now let's say black here plays h6, which really forces white's hand. And basically by that I mean white here unfortunately doesn't have time to castle either side because this bishop's under attack. And if the bishop drops back to h4 here, for example, then black will just simply continue g5 and the bishop is forced again to retreat and white has lost time there. That's not what we want. So with no time to lose, bishop takes e7 is best. And now after bishop takes e7, basically now I come to castling. So castling is one of three special moves. I won't go into the other two just yet. I did mention them in my previous video. The other two moves are pawn promotion, which is when you get one of your pawns. If you get one of your pawns to the other side of the board, you can promote that to a knight, a bishop, or a queen. Normally, you'd promote it to a queen because she's the most powerful piece. But there are exceptions, and this is one of the things that makes chess a tricky and challenging game. Anyway, but so here white can castle, and now basically when you do this, your king moves either 2 squares to the right, as in, and this is what we call kingside castling. And the reason for that is if you basically at the start of any game, if you can imagine basically the king and the queen standing next to one another, if we split the board in half vertically, we refer to this side of the board as the king side and the other side as the queen side. Hence, we have the terms king side castling and queen side castling. But so king side castling is more usual, and that's because the other thing I should say, sorry, is that there are certain rules that apply to castling. I'm not going to go into those too much now because I don't want to digress too much. But one of the things that you definitely should know, and that I assume will make sense anyway, is that there needs to be a clear path between the king and the rook. And so here you can see that there's a clear path between the king and the king's rook, the one on h1, and also the rook on a1. But now in the case of castling queenside, you have to move 3 pieces out of the way in order to clear that path, whereas on the king side, you only need to move 2. Hence, kingside castling is more usual because it's quicker. But so it's stronger here for white to castle queenside. And that's because when you do this, you automatically bring a rook onto the central D file. And just say a little bit about files. Whenever we mention central files, we're referring to the C, the D, the E, and the F files, because they're the files that typically go up and down and influence events in the center of the board. So, and it's also worth noting that this rook on D1 is on the same file as black's queen. And that's not without its points. So here, following Palerio's analysis, black moves this rook over to f8, attacking white's queen. But that's okay. We just play this queen up to e4. And now after rook takes f2, we could play queen takes e5 check here, but this isn't necessarily the best. I think, you know, the king can potentially escape here. So instead, white here just plays pawn takes pawn. And now in doing this, the threats to the knight on d5 is renewed. And notice that there are now white has basically this 2 pins. One is on this a2 g8 diagonal, again noting that this knight can't move without leaving the king in check from the bishop on c4. Also, even if that knight could move, it would be reluctant to do so because of this pin on the d file. So, of course, if the knight moves, were able to legally move, the danger is that black would be losing his queen to this rook on d1, which would just basically swoop down on the d8 square and nab that. So black here plays bishop g5 check, and king just moves over to b1. I beg your pardon. And now remember, I said a few moments ago that black's play in this game is intended purely to hold the extra material, because black, after all, is still a minor piece ahead here. And were he able to successfully hold that extra material, she would be able to consolidate their position and effectively win with that extra piece. So after all, a larger army normally beats a smaller one. So that explains this move, rook d2. So basically, black's trying to shut down, white's activity on this d file. But so white has a very good response here with this move h4, and this basically forces black's hand now. Basically, the black bishop on g5 is protecting that rook on d2. It could go to, could it go? Well, it turns out basically that black's best response here is just to trade rooks on d1 with check. And basically, when we're in check, we have to, before we can do anything else on the board, we have to get our king out of check. That's one of the rules that applies to kings and being in check. So white has no time here to take this bishop on g5 because he's in check, and the best way for us to get out of that is simply to take that. And now black has to decide what to do with this bishop on g5 that's under threat from this pawn on h4. So, okay, he gets a little greedy and snaps this off. So he thinks, well, okay, well, the bishop's okay there because it's protected by my queen on d8. It's on the same diagonal. So now is the time for white to cash in. So we get knight takes d5. So, and again, if black wants to hold that extra piece, then he has to recapture. And now, you would think that the most natural move for white to play here would be bishop takes d5 check, but actually that's not the case. Possibly white is still winning here, but it turns out that rook taking with the rook is much better, is stronger. And the reason is that we force, not only are we attacking black's queen here on d8, but we basically force black's hand. And the problem is here is that the black queen literally only has the g5 square, is the only safe square for the black queen. And in case you're wondering what I mean by that, is that any other square the queen moves to, it will be lost following another discovered check. So if, for example, well, I mean, in any case, it's also worth noting that if you move the queen off of this d8 h4 diagonal, for example, I don't know, let's say queen f8. No, it's not check. I beg your pardon. Sorry. Sorry, I lost the plot a bit there. Let me just go back. Well, okay. Well, let's look at a move like Queen f8 anyway. So I actually thought that this bishop on h4 was dropping with check there, but there's a bit of a blind spot. In any case, basically after a move like rook d8 check, again that's what we call a discovered check, because even though the bishop on c4 didn't move to call check, basically it's nonetheless check from the bishop on the c4. And basically, regardless of what black plays here, for example, king goes back to e7, basically black is losing the queen on the next move. And so the only move for black to play here is this move, queen g5. So basically there the queen's not, she's safe from any discovered checks, and she's also still protecting the bishop on h4. But basically black is losing here. So now after rook d6, this is a double check and a discovered check. So it's checked by the bishop and the rook on d6. King is forced to go back to e7, and now basically white is just so well coordinated here that black is really in too much of a straitjacket to find any good responses to white's attack. So now after rook g6, the rook is attacking the black queen. And of course that rook's nicely protected by our queen on e4. And so, well, where does she go? And actually in this position, again, I'm following the analysis of Palladio. And this was an actual game, in fact. This wasn't just, Palladio analysed this game in some detail. And so, well, here black actually resigned, gave up the game, even though he's a piece ahead. Well, so, we might rightly ask, well, why? I mean, basically black's busted here. So if, for instance, queen d2 here, the idea being that, well, okay, I mean, you could even take this bishop with check. In fact, that's what I'm pretty sure that is what white would play. And well, where do you go? So basically, we have to be a little careful because black is threatening checkmate on the back rank here, on the d1 square. So we can't be complacent. But the point is here that if, for instance, black plays this, let's say king f8, then white can simply play rook here to d6. And basically, you'll note that white has regained his piece. He's now a pawn ahead, but more importantly than that, basically the black king is in serious trouble here. Notice that the rook on d6 attacks the black queen and also prevents queen d1 check, because that can simply be taken. So it's just so rook d6 is just such a nice move there. The pawn on e5 does a nice job of protecting the rook, so the black queen can't take the rook without being taken. And really, she's forced there to basically play, a move like queen g5. That, tries to prevent the queen from coming down to d8 check, etc. But simply queen f2 check here, and it's game over. Regardless of what you play, king e8, whatever, it's just mate on f7. So that will be all from me for now. I hope this has been instructive and somewhat entertaining, and I will see you all again real soon. Thanks for watching.